Dancing is not just getting up painlessly like a leaf blown on the wind. Dancing is when you tear your heart out and rise out of your body to hang suspended between the worlds. Dance has always been more than a movement. It is a cultural artifact, a medium of storytelling, and a bridge between traditional and contemporary thought. It reflects the complex tapestry of human experience, where every gesture holds the potential to convey a narrative that words often cannot. It is rooted in history, yet it continues to reinvent itself, absorbing influences, challenging norms, and asserting identities. Our discussion today will examine how dance navigates these realms, serving as both a mirror to society and a catalyst for change. With the insights of our distinguished panel, let's embark on a journey together to uncover the stories and implications embedded within the art of movement. Urmimala ji, I'm going to start with you. In mapping critical dance studies, you critique the state-imposed labels. You argue that terms like Indian dance often erase the unique identities of localized practices. Dance often acts as a marker of identity and a tool for asserting belonging. How can we create a more inclusive understanding of Indian dance that moves beyond these binaries and reflects a full spectrum of traditions and expressions?
First of all, I thank JLF. And I thank Asad for having read the book, and both of you also for having gone through the book. I wrote this book out of a lot of frustration at this way in which dance is written in India, and also this deep conviction as an anthropologist and a dancer about dance being something that cannot be representing India in just one term, that is dance studies. So thank you for your specific question. And I think that because there has been this idea that classical dances are the dances that represent India, there are a lot of marginalizations and silences in other dance forms, and which actually fall into the gaps of community practices, rituals, and disappear. So what could be the way out? I have no solution, but I have certain points. One is that we have two kinds of dances. One is the participatory presentations and communications. And the second one is the presentational one, where an audience is involved. The participatory one is for one's own solidarity generation, recreation of cultural identities, and those. So in order for us to continue with both those forms, we need to have a conscious patronage, developing of audience, and really looking after occupation, because constant taking over of the lesser spoken, the silent arts is happening as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Bishnupriya ji, your work examines performance through the lens of the feminist theory, often revealing the marginalized narratives within theater and performance, and your collaborative work with Urmimala ji, Engendering Performance, dwells into how women performers navigate identity. How has dance historically shaped and been shaped by women's voices in India, especially amidst this socio-political hierarchy?
I'm not a dancer or a dance studies scholar, but like all theater people, you learn dance from a very, childhood to be able to dance on stage. But I think I'm here because Urmimala and I wrote a book. We've been collaborating. A lot of these ideas, which she has issues. She has a lot of, very pertinent problems she sort of identifies. We've had long dialogue and discussions over it. And I think a part of it has also been that, unlike theater, dance has an abstraction because, there's no words, there's no dialogue. The politics of dance is around patronage, around economics, around, the individual dancer. A lot of it, are the egos and the divas. So I understand, when Urmi comes in with this, but where we were trying to collaborate for so many years. We don't know if we've succeeded. We hope we have. Is we started with the idea that dance, theater, music were separated due to the colonial knowledge systems. So the colonial history, which we acknowledge, is what tore these sort of forms apart from each other, because they were all integrated when we look at, say, the Mughal practices and things like that. And here, what I find, very important is that what Urmi, is sort of trying to say, that they all, like the, classical dance, the other forms of dance, the popular performances, just like they exist in the same field of culture, the same field of cultural production, so does theater, so does music, so does, a lot of other theatrical performances. But then what makes, certain dance forms, like the classical dance, take this sort of very isolated, autonomous positions, as if, they exist somewhere else, and they don't belong to the field of production. It's like some sort of, self-indulgent, long, learning of techniques and all. It cannot be. It relates to all the other fields. And here I think Urmi's point, which she just mentioned on the audience, is very important, because it's the same audience who's moving from one to the other. And ultimately, you cannot ignore them. But I think this idea of dance, its abstractions, its, this intense technicalities, this classicization, it creates this idea of a connoisseurship. That it's like you're trying to say, Asad, that, it's put on a pedestal. And then the question will come is, who can read this connoisseurship? Who can read those techniques? And then, of course, it comes with a very heavy culture capital. And without, you don't democratize the art form. You create these exclusive little pockets of, higher form and lower forms, which is very problematic in a country like India.
Thank you. And do you want to talk a little bit about the feminine lens?
Yes, because, in theater, there are actresses, of course, and all theater needs actresses. And we've seen, from the IPTA, new actresses coming in, part of the cultural movement. But dance, for a feminist historiographer, for people like Urmi, is very important, because there's so many women dancers. And again, when I've talked to her, or we tried to look at it in our book, Engendering Performance, I always felt that, to do a feminist historiography of dance is far more difficult. And I really admire, Urmi, your book, the way you've rationalized it, something which I know really affects you, how you've tried to come into it through historically. And I think it's an impossible task to really recover the feminist politics of dance in many ways. And, but that's where you're rooted, and hats off to you, because where's that assertion? If it was, some sort of a designated agency, when it started and India was doing these classical dances, it was in the woman's body. They were the repositories. They were taking from these master, dance teachers and converting it to their own bodies. Like, we know in Odissi, of course, Bharatanatyam had Rukmini Devi Arundale, so it was a woman. But a lot of these classical dance forms started with these grand masters, and the woman actually interpreting it and making small little interventions. But what happens when that designated agency to experiment is also taken away? And, with the hegemonic state coming in, I think that's a problem which we are all facing. And that's where my feminist critique would be.
Well, thank you for that. Alokananda ji, your work in correctional homes using dance as a tool for reform and rehabilitation, people with Parkinson's disease, so many different diverse groups of people is quite impressive and quite groundbreaking. What inspired you, I know you're a trained dancer, but what inspired you on this journey, and how did you overcome the initial challenges of taking art into unconventional places?
Firstly, I have a lot of heart. very little head. So I work with my heart. And I think right from my childhood, I've been performing for the last 70 years now. I felt dance liberates. You know, if it doesn't liberate you, then it becomes something that you just learn and you execute. And it becomes a dance form. But if you are doing it from the soul, then it breaks all barriers. When I walked into the prison, I didn't know what I was going to face because, yes, there were challenges, but then tell me, I mean, there are challenges in everything that you do, and especially when you're breaking a glass ceiling, there will be challenges, but I don't consider a challenge. It's just a way of life. It's a part of the journey. Now, I couldn't teach those men who were all non-dancers any particular form. So, and they were reluctant. The boys were reluctant because they thought this woman walks in and she's trying to teach us to dance and we will be ridiculed as being effeminate. So I started with martial dance, you know, a kind of a basic of Kalaripayattu and Chow, and they started enjoying it. And then I switched to folk dances. And the rhythm they had lost in life was coming back into their body. You see, because all I did was channelize their unused physical energy. You know, in sports, they play sports. There is still a competition, an aggression. But in dance, you don't do that. I mean, you're all there together, doing something that you feel makes you feel free. And they started feeling good. And when you feel good, you do good. There's one thing that I would like to mention. That I always say this, that no child is born a criminal. Everybody is a fresh flower. Why they do what they do is something we cannot judge. They have been judged, they're being punished, and we call it a correctional home. So in whichever form, and I think dance has played a tremendous role in transforming their minds, their way of thinking. I travel with them all over the country, by trains, by buses, 50 of them. Not one of them have even imagined to escape. Secondly, more than 200 from the time I started have been released. Not one of them have gone back to crime. So I think it's not me, it's the rhythm, the music that resonated in their body and their mind did the magic.
Wonderful. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Urmimala ji, your book discusses the burden of history on Indian dance and the intersection with contemporary practices. You discuss how historical hierarchies have shaped the dance ecology in India. How can contemporary dancers reconcile tradition with innovation without perpetuating these hierarchies?
Thank you. I will start on the question of what happened in terms of freedom or the bindings. So dance liberates, yes, Alokananda Di, but you know, it also puts shackles of disciplines, of making a docile body, a body that wants to, that learns to follow diktats. That's the basic thing of making dancers docile. That's one of the points why dance becomes easily, more easily than theater, a state tool. That's one thing. The second thing I wanted to say was that in dance, what has happened is that women's sensual art, whatever was the sensuality factor, was turned into a spiritual factor for them to inhabit the stage, to be there on the stage and take take charge of the state. They had to be spiritual. The whole abstraction that you talk about, you know, is a kind of way to perhaps escape from that bind of that spirituality, because no other way was allowed. Thirdly, what you ask is very important, because there are people who have been working within this current atmosphere and trying to escape. So one of the examples is Prakash Boyer's the revolt, the Warli revolt. I don't know whether all of you will be going back and seeing it. See it. It's a hip-hop song which uses Warli art, which we now wear on our T-shirts, where dancing figures are in circles. And you will see that the dance is claiming ecological rights. It is talking about the tribe's rights, the Warli tribe's rights to land, to ecology, to the atmosphere. And they are doing it with dancing bodies and dancing symbols. That is today, and that is the word, that is the strength of dance that we wish for. The third, sorry, I'm taking just one example. I'll be very short. So there is this one example of a work called the Secular Project. It is by Mandi Preki. Again, you can see it on the internet. It is just a flag which is written, the Secular Project. The dancers, 4 dancers, are constantly rolling on the ground, using dancing techniques, dancing movements, inviting people from the crowd just to help them stretch that particular cloth to make that the secular project be visible for the camera, for the audience, for all of us. So it actually, the students have reacted when saying, the audience has reacted saying that we must, kind of adjust ourselves to the circumstances to become the part of the secular project. So that is where dance could come in again. Dance could speak for today. Dancing bodies could be relevant without even sometimes having a text. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Bishnupriya Ji, your work examines the interdisciplinary research that links theatre, performance, and activism. In your experience, how can a collaborative approach across disciplines, like theatre and dance specifically, break down these cultural and political hierarchies as discussed in Urmimala's book?
Not really. Asad, I thought I would, sort of move into, like you're saying, a more interdisciplinary approach. But slowly, I sort of moved back into looking at theatre, which is still at the center, and then bringing in, the other sort of forms, even within the theatre, popular and traditional. And one of my main, subjects I've looked at is, of course, Maya Rao, this very avant-garde, performer, dancer whose work I look at. And I have a book on her, and I've been following her work for a very long time. And what is interesting is she's a Kathakali classical dancer. But when she performs, she uses that form. But she doesn't dance Kathakali. And through the performance, then, talking to her own dancing body, coming back to Kathakali, she actually deconstructs every point of this, old traditional classical dance form. For me, then, that becomes an important interdisciplinary project. But I'm most comfortable when, Urmimala is working with me and we are in dialogue, and she's seeing, Maya Rao is this Kathakali dancer who's sort of breaking the form, and I'm coming in from a point where I'm seeing her as a performer who's adapting certain point. And to, go back to Urmi's whole section from which she talked about Mandi Preki's secular project, the Warli project, this whole idea about resistance in a dance form. That's something very close to my heart. But then my question would be that the people you mentioned, are they dancers, or they're coming out of the form totally because they want to make a statement? And through breaking the form, there's a meaning making, and that, is what resistance means to me as a theatre person. But it may not mean to a dancer. It might be sacrilege for many people in the dance world. So, yeah, that would be
But breaking a form is also creating a new form. It's evolution, right? In a way.
the experts should say.
All right, we're going to the expert, Alokananda Ji. One of your most celebrated projects, the Balmiki Pratibha, was performed by inmates and has transformed lives. What made you choose, you have a couple of productions, I know, but what made you choose this particular one? And how did the story of redemption resonate with the people you work with?
We all know the story of Valmiki. He was a dacoit who was transformed into a saint and who wrote Ramayana. Now, this was the transformation of a dacoit to a saint that they could connect to, that they could also be reformed and they could also do good. And while rehearsing over time, it kind of penetrated into their system. And they could somehow connect to it and feel that they were not all bad. And coming to that, coming to dance styles, I would just like to say that, dance is the most ancient language. When there was no language, people spoke with gestures, which was later reconstructed and made into mudras, which anybody can understand, right? So, a dancer can speak or express through his or her body, mind, and soul, even without any language. But sometimes for people like prisoners, the words are important because that's what gets into them, along with the music and the rhythm. And as I said, that although flowing movements are necessary to make you feel connected to the Supreme, they needed a lot of rhythm. And without rhythm, I don't think they could have gone their rhythm back. They wouldn't have been interested in free-flowing dance. And classical dance has evolved with time. Even with the most conservative classical dancers, I think nowadays we see a lot of innovations that are taking place. I'm a dancer, yes. I have been an Odissi dancer, but I've also learned classical ballet. So with time, I moved away from the rigidity of the classical form and blended ballet with it to make myself feel comfortable and good. As I keep saying that when you feel good, you do good. So when you feel good within, you perform. I mean, you don't have to be a performer all the time. Anybody can be a dancer. But for a performer, yes, you have to have a certain discipline. And classical dance, I think, teaches you the grammar. And you make your own sentences. That's how I feel. You learn the nouns and the adjectives. Yes. And you create your own, make your sentence. Yes. And Balmiki Pratibha, of course, has been a landmark. We have just completed the 100th performance recently. Yes. And
Wonderful. And as the curator of the Opera House, we have so much of these evolved dance forms being performed. And it's also so interesting, you mentioned about patronage, you mentioned about audiences. And to build audiences is also difficult, and people are gravitating towards this. They want the classic, but they also want to see new innovation in all art forms, not just dance. Urmimala ji, in your curriculum at JNU, you encourage students to think about what should be conserved and what can they evolve. How do you guide them navigating this balance between respecting tradition and fostering innovation in dance?
So in that, actually, interestingly, I answer some of Bishnupriya's concerns as well. So in the courses, I had two courses. One is Dance, Body and Society. One is Indian Dance Theory and Practice. Apart from that, there were other courses, but these were two main, completely focused dance courses. And in that, they were taught the first thing to not be judgmental or hierarchical in what they wanted to look at as dance. And secondly, the second thing that we wanted to teach them is that if regions need language, if there are, everyone understands that communities need their own languages, communities like ethnicities, like minorities, like women, everyone have been struggling for their own language. In dance also, that right must be there. So in their own manner, dance cannot be superimposed from above, and that is why look at dance, look at different dance histories, read more about regional dances, look at what is dance called among different kinds of communities. It could be khel, it could be play, something that means play. It is not even mentioned as dance. But that difference, because in the class when they come, when you ask them what is the first picture you get of dance in India, they would say flowers in the hair, mehndi in the hand, lot of ornaments, and you freak out. Where to start from? What would you teach them about history? Dance history is problematic. It goes mytho-historical. It goes into, Nataraja being the lord of dance, and then again it will talk about some Raja or some patron, and then it will talk about women's bodies. It is all over the place. So we teach them to read histories, we teach them to look at historiographies and claim them. And then we teach them to first take a step back from what they know is dance. Thank you.
Wonderful. Bishnupriya Ji, you worked extensively on the history of Indian performance traditions. So how do you see the future of these traditions in this rapidly globalizing world we live in, and what role do festivals and platforms like this do in keeping it alive?
But before I come to this, can I just respond a
Please.
bit? We are a university department which sort of the first department of its kind, which was, trying to archive, create, a history writing, critical historiography. And it was not easy because we don't train dancers, though we had a lot of dancers who came to the department. And I remember initially when Urmi was trying to tell them this thing about community, how, classical dance comes from, community practices. There were a lot of dancers from the classical tradition who had grown up in that, found it very difficult. They were like traumatized. And then when they went back to some of these great gurus, I won't name them, and started asking very mild questions, when for us, they were the students who, really wasn't convinced of what we were saying. They were thrown out of those dance institutions and, or told that don't go back to JNU, stay with the tradition, you have to perform this. So it's a very long struggle, but unless we have that, this sort of hegemonic structure of the traditional, what is the traditional, these are questions we have to understand, because traditional is also a reconstruction project, just like classical dance is a reconstruction project. It didn't exist. It had existed, it may have died out, then it was revived through, in post-colonial modern histories. Similarly, my area is theatre history, which is a colonial import. And because of that, there's always been the thing that, it's international, it's foreign, it's nothing to do with India. After independence, it's a nation-building project. We have to look at, traditional performances, Kuriyattam, Kathakali. So for me, of course, I look at them. I find them very, very interesting. But, I'm not conditioned to understand that context, those languages, those idioms. I'm trained as a theatre performer. But to put theatre at the center, for me, this is again the larger field. And that's where I sort of interact with them. And festival culture has been what has established these forms, right? We know post-independent India, there were these huge seminars on classical dance, on theatre, on music, there have been these huge festivals in India, abroad, India Festival in the USSR when we had the socialist world. So it's but when you come to a place like this, which is not a performance festival, but more, celebrating critical theories, critical histories, books which, Urmimala has written, because these books don't make sense if it's, in the hallowed space of the academia. We really need to take it to the public domain. We want to take it to, a younger audience like JLF has. And I really think it's, a very, very good step towards popularizing this sort of criticality.
Thank you for that. Alokananda ji, you have described dance as a flow of joyful human expressions, and that connects the performer to a higher energy. So how do you ensure that this emotional and spiritual connection remains central when you're working with, again, these are non-dancers, different age groups, different backgrounds, unfamiliar with formal techniques? And how do you work, because you work with different segments also, from juvenile offenders to acid attack survivors. How do you ensure that this ethos resonates with them and the feeling?
Firstly, we are all children of God. So that spirituality and the connect with the Supreme lies dormant with some, and it can be ignited. Not consciously, but unconsciously it gets ignited when you feel that you are worth something. They lose their sense of worth, and when they get it back, they know that it's divine intervention, and I can sense it in them. Well, it is, the joy of movement can actually uplift you to that level. And I ditto you when you're talking about her book, that something about liberty, liberation is what is necessary. And you cannot be confined, and each individual is different, and each body speaks differently, and we must allow that to happen. How you connect with the Supreme is up to you. We can only ignite that goodness in them. And all the prisoners in West Bengal, they call me Ma. Okay, I'm a mother to them. So I try to instill those values which they had lost in life through movements and as a mother, without preaching. So I think dance is a medium which can actually, like the Sufi dancers, what do? They're just, they're just whirling around. But how do they feel? Because they can absorb that energy, the supreme energy within them. So what we as mentors should help them is to ignite that. And each one responds in a different way. And they all come from different religious backgrounds, like you said. But when they're dancing together, they create magic. I wish someday you can get to see them. And I really, really thank this platform, because many of you may not have known about this. And I have worked in the US prison as well. And it had the same effect. They said that something within the head felt light. That's dance.
Wonderful. I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask you all a closing question, then we'll maybe get 2-3 audience questions. So each of you have explored dance from unique perspectives, be it as a performer, be it an academic, a social reformer. And as we are witnessing this increased globalization of art and culture, what are some of the most urgent challenges or opportunities for dance in India today?
Dance needs to find relevance and stay relevant. And in that, I think it's not a hopeless situation at all, because people like Alokananda are living examples. And there are people who have been working on movement-based therapies. There are people who are working on, bodies which have had this, the people who have had a terrible sense of having rented out the body repeatedly in their professions. And then to again come back to the body, to own it with all its love, all its emotions, to be able to communicate to the others with looking straight into the eyes instead of feeling, disempowered constantly. Those are works which have to be pushed forward. Works like Alokananda, these works like academics who work on, creating this kind of knowledge, that dance can exist for each one of us. We can reinvent. We can be in that moment of feeling that dance works. It is not just a puppetry. It's not just communicating some mythical story somewhere of some god and some goddess dancing. It is us. It is our bodies activated, energized.
Yes, I think you're very correct. The materiality of the body is at the center. So it has a lot of potential. And, when they break the form and they do it, you can also understand what they are questioning and challenging. And I think the challenges are the same across the performing arts because, neoliberal society, a corporatization of all forms of culture, state coming in, a very conservative state where this idea of spiritualism, funding, because the state has always protected these spaces for a very long time, since independence, That's why we had all those cultural institutions. But now the control is coming from a very different point, which I think is dangerous. But I think the more hegemonic they are, the more they try to control, young dancers are coming out. And, when she talks of the resistances, be it Mandi Breki, be it Astha Gandhi, they also know the form. They're fabulous in, when they're dancing, they're mesmerizing, but they're also, highlighting the materiality of the body vis-a-vis the spiritualism, the, sort of making your body abstract.
Personally, for me, after all these years, I have been a performer. But today I feel that if my art, my dance, does not help the society, then it's meaningless. It should help others. And how I work with the prisoners is not what I would apply on Parkinson's patients. There cannot be such rhythmic movements. So as I said, each individual is different, but we must reach out and help one another through dance.
Thank you for that. I think we've got about 3 minutes, so I think we can do 2 questions. Can we get some mics here, guys? Up front, the lady.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion. For dance to stay relevant, I work as an educator, and for it to be democratized, I believe that the young have to be the young have to experience it, to appreciate it, for somebody to talk about it. But the creative arts are losing their focus in the school curriculums. I've seen that. It's seen as an extracurricular activity. What are your thoughts on this? Because what you're talking about, if we don't train the young, right, how is all of this going to happen?
Yeah. So thank you for this question. This is something that remained undiscussed. So for children to be interested, the dance has to speak to them. And the dance has to speak to their surroundings and their friends and the things that are important. It cannot be replaced by Bollywood, because Bollywood replaces everything. Because Bollywood is something that makes them speak to each other easily. And the classical dance needs music, needs a space, needs a certain kind of guru's permission. So dance has to be not a product in school. Dance has to be the process.
Wonderful. You know, actually, just to add to that, in my daughter's school, they have a class on Kathak and Tabla together. And it's interesting to see how the boys have to be encouraged, really, to actually take up Kathak. And it's a task. But, you know, once they're there, they're there. One last question. At the back.
Hello. Yeah. Last question is a lot of responsibility. First of all, I want to say very inspiring. Alokananda ji, I've never thought I wanted to be a criminal, but I almost am sorry that I'm missing the opportunity.
Please.
It sounds beautiful. Look, I just want to raise a couple of points, and I'll do it very quickly. One of them is this fear of the hegemony or the connoisseurship communities as a form of oppression. But connoisseurship is natural. You can't have hamburgers without becoming a connoisseur of hamburgers. You can't have French fries without becoming a connoisseur of French fries. So I'm wondering if there are forms of liberation. And I'm just thinking of the example of the Valmiki Pratibha. One of the things that sometimes happens, and when you spoke about the reaction of people you were talking to in the historical project, you know, modern historiography often in India has been an eraser of traditional community and of traditional knowledge. So I'm wondering if that's a concern, and specifically about dance. For those of us who've loved Indian dance forever, it feels like all of the ideas of agency are in there. All the stories are about agency and power.
So we're out of time, so you can just end it with a question quickly.
So isn't there a way to really think about the stories that are the traditional stories of dance and techniques as forms of empowerment and agency, because that's what they're meant to be?
That's what she does.
Yes, that's what I have been doing, and that's what she has just mentioned, that we do need tradition, but we need to focus on evolving that into modern times, because you cannot live that period now, then you cannot reach out to the youth, the present generation. So we have to modulate in a way so that the youth can
You want to respond?
find
One,
it.
just we'll be real quick. No, we don't have time for another question. Let it finish.
Just one sentence here. If we stop thinking of all the arts or everyone that the communities have as our art to use and throw and change, then we are in a good place, because we don't need to be the saviors. They will save their arts in whatever form they survive, because they have a certain kind of function going on. So we don't need to do that good work for them, is
Wonderful.
what I would say.
I mean, thank you to this this amazing panel. I mean, you know, a lot of what you all have said resonates across the arts as a whole, and dance being an important part of it. I mean, the whole patronage, the audience building, the education, I think that's a fundamental thing we didn't get to. That was the next lot of questions about the arts education, especially dance. And how do you educate the younger generation? Because they are the ones going to take it forward in this fragmented world that we live in. But thank you for this exciting discussion. Thank you to the audience for being here.